Horrific, a slaughter, a massacre. These are the kind of words that millions, if not billions, of ordinary people around the world are perfectly comfortable using to describe Israel's relentless killing of over 30,000 Palestinians in Gaza, including over 13,000 children, whether they were sheltering in hospitals or schools or in mosques or churches. And yet these are not words that tend to be used by Western media outlets, in particular by American mainstream media, to describe what is happening in Gaza to the Palestinians as they are killed in record numbers and in some of the most brutal ways imaginable. They're rightly used for Israeli victims, yes, but not for Palestinians. Oh no. And you don't have to take my word for it. The numbers don't lie. A survey of articles in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the LA Times, reported on by The Intercept back in January, found that the term slaughter was used by editors and reporters to describe the killing of Israelis versus Palestinians 60-1. And massacre was used to describe the killing of Israelis versus Palestinians 125-2. Horrific was used to describe the killing of Israelis versus Palestinians 36-4. What else do we call that other than the deliberate dehumanization of the Palestinian people? Remember when the Associated Press referred to the 12,300 Palestinian minors killed by Israel? Can't say the word children. Oh no, they're Palestinian. They're not innocent. They're not human. It's not just US newspapers, but US television too. In a study of the guests who appeared on Sunday morning political shows in the first 3 months after October the 7th, Dr. William Youmans found that not only were the American guests who appeared on air more than twice as likely to sympathize with Israel than with the Palestinians, but that overall there were 10 times as many Israeli guests as Palestinians. 10 times. What else do we call that other than the deliberate dehumanization of the Palestinian people? And it's not just the US media. The UK's isn't much better. A study of the BBC's online coverage of this issue, published by a pair of data scientists in January, found a systematic disparity in how Palestinian and Israeli deaths are treated. See, Palestinians, per the BBC, tend to die or be killed, but very rarely are they murdered. No, that term is almost exclusively reserved for Israelis when it comes to this war, with a 101-to-1 Israeli to Palestinian ratio. In addition, words like mother, daughter, father, son were much more likely to be used for Israeli victims of Palestinian violence, but not so much for Palestinian victims of Israeli violence. They just tend to be nameless, faceless numbers, statistics. What else do we call that other than the deliberate dehumanization of the Palestinian people? Look, the Western media's coverage of what the International Court of Justice has called a plausible genocide unfolding in front of our eyes, in my view, is perhaps the greatest, most consequential, most shameful media failure of our lifetimes. Only the media's coverage of Iraqi WMDs and the non-existent threat from Saddam Hussein back in 2003 comes even close to what we've all had to see, read, and hear in recent months. So it's difficult to overstate just how dehumanized Palestinians are, not just in our media discourse, but in our political discourse too. Earlier this month, in an interview with The New Yorker, Aaron David Miller, a veteran US State Department advisor who has worked on Middle East policy for multiple presidents, let the cat out of the bag. Do I think that Joe Biden has the same depth of feeling and empathy for the Palestinians of Gaza as he does for the Israelis? No, he doesn't. Nor does he convey it. I don't think there's any doubt about that. We have a word for this phenomenon of caring more about the suffering of one group of human beings over another, of prioritizing one group of people over another based on their nationality, their ethnicity. It's called racism. Now, one of the reasons I founded Zeteo, which officially launches this week, and one of the reasons I'm hosting this new weekly show for Zeteo, is that I'm fed up with media organizations failing to challenge the racism and bigotry of our leaders. And I'm also fed up with media organizations themselves pushing racist, bigoted, dehumanizing coverage of minorities across the board, but especially of the Palestinians. I think the world deserves better. I think the American people in particular deserve better. Because here's what's so fascinating. Poll after poll shows the American people support a ceasefire. One poll in February found half of all Americans believe Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. And that's after being exposed only to our current, awful, one-sided media coverage of this issue. Imagine what those numbers would look like if we had a media that actually showed Americans what's happening on the ground in Gaza, that gave Palestinians a voice, a platform, or actually treated Palestinians as victims of Israeli violence, as human beings, deserving of our compassion, our empathy, our solidarity. Imagine what a world we could live in if we had a media like that.